My sister's actions have unfortunately led her children down a troubling path, one that is negatively impacting our entire neighborhood. Their behavior has become a significant concern, and it has reached a point where I felt compelled to call the police. The situation escalated when, after returning home from work one evening, I noticed that the door of my shed was ajar. The padlock, which I had securely placed on the door, was broken, and I immediately sensed that something was wrong. Inside the shed, I had stored numerous bags filled with soda cans. I tend to consume a lot of soda, which results in a buildup of cans that I plan to take to the bottle drop shortly. However, it wasn't just the cans that were missing. I also discovered that several of my gardening tools and other items had been taken. Among the missing items were a machete, a gas can, and a variety of other tools that I had accumulated over the years. Naturally, I felt a strong need to investigate further, so I checked my security cameras for any recorded footage. To my dismay, the video revealed my 3 nephews breaking into the shed early that morning, right after I had left for work. They had used a hammer to smash the lock and steal not only the soda cans but also my various tools. Distressed, I called my sister to inform her about what had transpired. Initially, she and her husband were in denial, insisting that their children could not have done such a thing. However, I decided to confront them by showing them the recorded footage from my cameras. This evidence shifted their anger from the children to the reality of the situation. They were furious to find out that their kids had committed theft and even skipped school to do it. In the end, I managed to retrieve the stolen tools, but the gas can was returned empty. To my frustration, my nephews had already cashed in the soda cans and spent the money, amounting to nearly $200, on video games and junk food. I confronted my sister about the situation and informed her that she owed me over $200 for both the value of the cans and the damage done to the padlock. The reaction from my sister and her husband changed dramatically. They went from being angry at their kids to making excuses for their behavior. They then shifted their frustration towards me for expecting reimbursement, citing their financial struggles with 3 children and a mortgage. I made it clear that I thought it was fair to expect compensation, either from them or I would have no choice but to contact the police and press charges. The conversation escalated, and they asked me to leave, but I stood my ground, giving them an ultimatum. They had 2 days to find a way to repay me before I involved law enforcement. The reality is that my nephews have stolen from me before, which is why I had installed the security cameras in the first place. Although I knew what they did was wrong, I also recognized that my sister and her husband were likely in a tight financial situation, especially after the recent holidays. Following this confrontation, I started receiving numerous messages from them, calling me heartless for insisting on repayment. The next day, I called my sister and her husband again, hoping to find a middle ground. However, they refused to discuss any possible ways to repay me and went so far as to say it was my fault for storing the cans in the shed, implying that I had somehow tempted my nephews into stealing from me. This accusation enraged me further, leading me to decide that I was done with trying to resolve this situation privately. My eldest nephew even sent me a disrespectful picture of himself holding a soda can while giving me the finger, which only confirmed my decision. With all of this evidence in hand, I went to the police station and filed a report. I provided them with a copy of the video footage showing my nephews stealing from my shed, along with the broken lock as physical evidence. I also presented the long string of text messages I had received, which I had screenshot, and I even included the insulting photo sent by my eldest nephew. While I didn't know the outcome of their actions at that point, I felt assured that they would face some consequences. I hoped that perhaps community service might help change their attitudes. I was worried about the fact that my nephews had taken the machete, but the police classified it as a tool, especially since they had taken various other tools as well. The list of items included gardening shears, a steel rake, 2 shovels, one being a folding camping shovel, a full 2-gallon gas can, a cheap power drill I had purchased for around $5, an electric hedge trimmer, and a small electric chainsaw. Amazingly, they didn't take the lawn mower, weed whacker, extension cords, or an old radio I had in there. I have no idea why they selected the items they did, but I suspect they thought they could resell them for some quick cash. Fortunately, I managed to get most of the items back, although the gas that had been in the can was gone, and I wasn't sure what they had used it for. It was old gas anyway. After their initial break-in, it seemed like they took as much as they could carry by hand, but then they returned with shopping carts to haul away more items. It seems that my nephews have been involved in activities that clearly crossed the line. I suspect they not only stole some items, but it became apparent that they made multiple trips to gather everything, showing a lack of concern for the consequences of their actions. After they finished, they didn't even bother to close the shed door, which only added to the feeling of disrespect. As a result, my nephews now face serious trouble for trespassing and harassment. I anticipate that my phone will be constantly buzzing with calls from the police regarding these kids, likely either today or tomorrow. I firmly believe that this issue is one I have to stand my ground on, no matter the outcome. At this point, I am indifferent to the idea of recovering the missing money, as they were given ample chances to do the right thing. In response to their actions, I have taken proactive measures. I replaced the lock on the shed with a much sturdier one. Additionally, I decided that the machete, which I previously kept there, will no longer be stored in the shed for safety reasons. I have also spoken with some neighbors about what happened, and they informed me that cans have been disappearing frequently throughout the neighborhood. It appears that if anyone left a bag of cans outside, there was a high likelihood it would be stolen. Although I can't definitively say my nephews were behind this, if they were, it suggests they may have been engaging in this behavior for months. I also reached out to other relatives, and it seems they share my frustration with my sister and her partner, Bill. Knowing that they see the situation from my perspective is reassuring, especially since I filed a police report. I feared that my family might turn against me, but instead, I was met with supportive messages, affirming that it's about time the kids faced some consequences for their actions. It's worth noting that my nephews have stolen from other family members as well. Some individuals suggested that I should allow my nephews to work off the $200 they owe me. However, I firmly rejected that idea. These kids have shown time and again that they despise doing any sort of work they're not interested in and would likely just complain the whole time, insisting that the world is against them. Furthermore, I would have to supervise them during the entire process, which is something I would rather avoid. I have good reasons for banning them from my home. Their stealing began with food and snacks, later escalating to DVDs and video games. I had even started marking my belongings with permanent markers so I could prove when they had taken something of mine. They would often try to claim they were just borrowing items, but I always confronted them, demanding the return of my possessions. Each time, their apologies felt insincere, lacking any real remorse. The final incident that led to my decision to ban them permanently from my home was particularly outrageous. They used a hidden spare key to gain entry into my house and stole 3 6-packs of my favorite blood orange beer from my fridge. Not only did they raid my kitchen for other snacks, but one of them even left a disgusting mess in my bathroom, failing to flush and deliberately urinating on the floor. They tried to deny their involvement, but I had evidence that the stolen beer was hidden in their room. My sister and Bill barely imposed any real punishment on them, brushing it off with a casual, boys will be boys, attitude. When I made it clear that they and their children were no longer welcome at my house, I was met with criticism. Given all these issues, I decided to install cameras around my property without informing anyone. This turned out to be a wise choice because my nephews were completely unaware of their presence when they broke into my shed. I now realize that I was an easy target for them. I plan to get more cameras installed inside my house when my budget allows. Recently, an update on the situation has emerged. My nephews were arrested on Saturday. The police showed up at their house with a warrant, and my sister and Bill had no choice but to let them in. Witnesses reported that all 3 nephews transformed from being cocky and dismissive to crying like babies as they were handcuffed. A neighbor who knows my sister witnessed the scene and later informed me about it. Following the arrests, my sister and Bill flooded my phone with messages. They were unable to secure their children's release until Monday morning. Now, the boys are facing charges that include larceny, willful destruction of property, vandalism, and harassment. The police are treating this case with great seriousness, as there have been numerous complaints about my nephews for some time, but nothing could be proven until now. In the past few months, bags of cans have been disappearing, raising further concerns in the neighborhood. In recent months, there has been a troubling trend in the neighborhood as bags of cans have been disappearing. The exact cause of this theft remains uncertain, but my nephews are among the likely suspects. With the news of their recent arrest circulating, it is hoped that neighbors with security cameras will come forward with additional footage to shed light on the situation. Tensions escalated when my sister and Bill arrived at my home. I made the decision not to open the door, firmly expressing that the problems we were facing originated from their failure to hold their children accountable for their actions. This stance infuriated them, leading to a loud and aggressive pounding on my door. Despite their attempts to pressure me, I reiterated my willingness to involve law enforcement if necessary. My previous experiences with calling the police gave them a clear indication that I was serious, prompting them to leave without further incident. However, their departure did not mark the end of the conflict, as they continued to inundate me with phone calls and messages. Rather than blocking their numbers, I chose to keep all their messages for my records. I have made the decision to pursue small claims court to address the situation, not out of a desire for money, but to send a strong message. Although I have already replaced the damaged padlock with a higher quality version, it is essential that the children learn a valuable lesson about their behavior. The support from my family, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and more, has been unwavering. They share my frustration, as my nephew's actions have affected them as well. Several family members have gone so far as to ban my nephews from their homes in response to their thefts. I plan to advocate for community service for my nephews, not only because it is a constructive consequence, but because I know it will be something they dislike immensely. When faced with any work they feel is beneath them, they tend to stand around grumbling and acting as though they are being unfairly targeted, resulting in little productivity. I believe that a substantial number of hours dedicated to unpaid community service could instill some much-needed discipline and respect in them, as they have been overly pampered for too long. In a surprising turn of events, my sister and Bill did not respond to the lawsuit as I anticipated they would. Instead, they caved under the pressure. I had filed a lawsuit in small claims court against them for their children's actions, seeking $500 to cover the stolen items, the destruction of personal property, the cost of filing the claim, and for the emotional distress caused by the harassment. A friend of mine, whose father is a lawyer, provided a free consultation and confirmed that I had a strong case, especially with the video evidence of my nephew's stealing and the aggressive behavior exhibited by my sister and Bill. When my sister and Bill were formally served with the lawsuit, they called me in a panic. They pleaded with me, saying that I couldn't go through with this. I responded firmly, stating that their negligence in parenting led to this situation, and if they wanted to speak to me again, it would have to be either in court or when they paid the $500 I was requesting. Following that conversation, I ended the call. The next evening, I had friends over to unwind after a long workday. We were relaxing and watching a movie, all of us too tired for anything more energetic. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Looking outside, I saw my sister and Bill, clearly unhappy. I opened the door slightly but kept the screen closed, asking them what they were doing at my house. They expressed that they were exhausted from the ongoing conflict and admitted to making serious mistakes by allowing things to escalate this far. They claimed they simply wanted to make amends. With my friends present as witnesses, Bill slid an envelope through the gap in the door. It contained $500 and $50 bills, which he claimed came from his personal savings. He promised me that going forward, they would ensure my nephews received proper consequences for their actions. They did not ask me to drop the charges against them. Instead, they really pleaded with me to be lenient in my approach. I explained that I was only pushing for community service, which I considered to be quite lenient given the circumstances. I hoped that if we worked together on this, the judge would see it my way and agree. After hearing my proposal, they sighed and agreed that they would cooperate with my request if that was all I wanted. They then walked away without causing any fuss or creating a scene. My friends were quick to congratulate me on standing firm in my decision, and soon after, other family members expressed their support as well. Later, I learned from my parents that they had actually issued a serious ultimatum to my sister and her husband. They threatened to disown my sister if she and her husband did not make some significant changes in their lives for the better. It was a tough stance to take, but now my sister and her husband have indeed made some adjustments. While some people may see this as forced change, it is probably the best outcome we can expect from them at this point. My mom visited my sister and Bill after they had repaid me. During her visit, she shared that my nephews were not allowed to play video games anymore. In fact, every single video game console and related item had been tucked away, and the television they usually watched had also disappeared. Instead of playing or having fun, all three of my nephews spent most of their time holed up in their rooms. They were rude and unwelcoming to their grandmother, which was disheartening to hear. However, my sister insisted that they were dealing with the situation, trying to make things better. I have decided to drop the lawsuit now that I have received the payment I asked for, but my nephews still have court dates coming up related to theft charges. It seems they are finally going to receive the parenting they should have been getting all along. I have also been assured by my family that my nephews will not be visiting my house anytime soon. The strict rules are now that they are to remain either at school or at home for the foreseeable future. They will not be welcome in my home for a long time, as my sister and Bill are now essentially forced to engage in the parenting that they had neglected before. The majority of our family is supportive of my stance because my nephews had gotten into situations that caused a lot of resentment among family members. Regarding some updates, I took the necessary step of installing additional security cameras, including one positioned right above the shed, ensuring I have the area fully monitored. I want to believe that my sister, Bill, and my nephews have learned something from this entire ordeal, but that is not fully the case, especially with my eldest nephew. He has not been able to move past his desire for revenge. Here is what happened. They did not receive more than 100 hours of community service each, as I had been compensated by their parents when we settled out of court. The judge expedited the case, thus, my nephews ended up picking up garbage and doing maintenance work around several local parks. The person supervising them was a retired drill sergeant, which meant they had no fun during this experience at all. My eldest nephew continuously clashed with authority during the community service and got into shouting matches with everyone trying to get him to work. His father had to be called in just to make him pick up a rake. Throughout this challenging time, my eldest nephew openly blamed me for his predicament. Initially, his brothers sided with him, but over time, they began to realize that his behavior was out of line and simply wrong. They stopped following his lead and distanced themselves from him. The situation turned even more complicated when my sister and Bill decided to place blame on me for the divide forming in their family. However, this blame did not resonate with anyone else in the family, as everyone clearly saw that the issues stemmed from their poor parenting choices. With no one else to blame, they turned silent and bitter. Half of the family refused to associate with them, and their own children became divided as well, largely because the eldest nephew continued to resist change. Things escalated to the point where my eldest nephew did something incredibly foolish. One night, he sneaked out of the house and attacked my property using a pair of his father's claw hammers. He had one hammer in each hand and immediately began smashing the new lock on my shed. Although the lock didn't break entirely, he damaged it enough that it became unusable, forcing me to later remove it with bolt cutters. The damage he caused to the shed door was significant and left me with yet another problem to deal with. The damage to the shed door was extensive, caused by the vicious strikes of a hammer wielded by an intruder. One morning, I woke up to the alarming sounds of hammers hitting metal. I felt an unsettling surge of anxiety as I peered out my bedroom window. My heart raced when I spotted a figure outside, swinging a hammer at the shed. At first, I couldn't recognize him because he was wearing a mask that looked quite disturbing. I quickly realized that the situation was serious. When he noticed the lights flickering on in my bedroom, he reacted violently, throwing one of the hammers through my window. The glass shattered everywhere, creating a dangerous mess. I was barefoot at the time, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me, glad that I hadn't cut my feet on the jagged pieces of glass. Just as I was processing the chaos, my nephew began pounding on my back door with the remaining hammer. The damage he caused was severe. He broke the door knob, shattered the window on the door, and tore into the wood itself using the claw of the hammer. I couldn't help but worry that the door wouldn't hold against his relentless assault. In a panic, I shouted that the police were on their way, which made him flee the scene just before they arrived. Afterward, the night vision footage from my security camera provided clear proof of who the intruder was. Despite wearing a mask, he was easily identifiable because he was dressed in his school hoodie and a pair of distinctive Nike shoes. His brothers didn't own any shoes like that, making it impossible to mistake his identity. Moreover, his fingerprints were found on the hammer he threw at my window. The police were able to match these fingerprints to him since all my nephews had been fingerprinted previously during an earlier arrest. When the police arrived to confront my eldest nephew, he outright denied his involvement. However, there was no one else who could have committed the crime. The second hammer was later discovered in his room, along with the clothes and mask he wore, all of which were taken as evidence. The mask was of a character from Star Wars known as the Grand Inquisitor. In a surprising turn, his parents did not try to defend him or shift the blame onto me. Instead, they allowed their son to be taken away, even as he screamed in protest. Although I wasn't there to witness the arrest, my sister recounted that my nephew vacillated between tears of claiming his innocence and aggressive outbursts blaming me for everything he had done. He was subjected to an extensive mental health evaluation and was diagnosed as potentially bipolar. While this diagnosis might explain some of his behavior, it did not excuse his actions. Once he was correctly diagnosed, he began deflecting responsibility, claiming that his mental health issues justified his actions. Ultimately, he faced a month-long stay in juvenile hall. During this time, he was placed on medication, and he eventually pleaded guilty to his crimes to avoid a more drawn-out court process. In exchange for his guilty plea, he agreed to complete more community service, participate in mandatory counseling, and comply with a probation period. Following these events, his father came to my house to replace the broken window and door, but he barely uttered a word to me during the repair. It was clear that tensions were high, and communication was strained. My two younger nephews, however, began to distance themselves from their older brother, effectively excluding him from their lives. This separation was fueled by his lack of remorse for the chaos he had caused in my home. To make matters worse, he was forced to repeat a school year due to the plummeting grades resulting from his actions, a situation that added more disappointment for his parents. In July, my two younger nephews took it upon themselves to come and personally apologize to me. They explained that they often followed their older brother's lead, thinking that his actions were fun. However, they now realized that the consequences of his actions were far too severe for any fleeting enjoyment they might have experienced. They expressed a desire to reconnect and have their fun uncle back in their lives. I agreed to this, but I made it clear that they would need to work to earn back my trust, which they enthusiastically accepted. Several months later, my eldest nephew turned 17, but his birthday was notably bleak. He received no gifts or even a cake, a decision made as part of the consequences of his earlier misdeeds. I could only imagine the financial strain he had put on his parents over the past year. He had led his younger siblings into wrongdoing, resulting in the destruction of property and a lawsuit that likely cost his family over $1,000 in total for replacing the door and window. In stark contrast, my youngest nephew celebrated his birthday a month later, receiving a brand new mountain bike among other gifts. This disparity in celebrations upset my eldest nephew. The differences in their experiences highlighted the consequences of choices made and the impact those choices had on family dynamics, trust, and their relationships moving forward. This situation really upset my eldest nephew, leading him to react in a very destructive way. In his anger, he took a kitchen knife and slashed the tires on his bike, which only landed him in deeper trouble. Knowing a thing or two about fixing bikes, I decided to help out. I went to the store and bought new tubes and tires for the damaged bike. After replacing the tires, the bike was back in working order, and my nephew was incredibly grateful for my help. Despite this act of kindness, my eldest nephew felt trapped and began to think about running away. He simply walked out of the house, jumped on his bike with a backpack filled with his belongings, and rode off without telling anyone. His parents quickly grew concerned and reported him missing when they found a goodbye letter he left behind. In that letter, he placed blame on both me and his bipolar disorder for all the problems he felt he faced. He wrote that he couldn't wait to turn 18 and escape from us all, suggesting that he was doing us a favor by leaving early. Thankfully, he returned 3 days later, but when he came back, he looked rough, and he didn't have his bike or his backpack. He refused to share what had happened to him during those days. Once he was back, he was given a stern talking to for constantly using me as a scapegoat for his personal problems. After all, it was easy for him to point fingers in my direction. But I reminded everyone that I didn't make him steal from me, attack my house, or run away. Those actions were entirely his own choices. His running away nearly resulted in him being sent back to juvenile detention for violating his probation. Fortunately for him, he managed to avoid that consequence. Currently, my eldest nephew spends most of his time confined to his room when he isn't at school, doing chores, or attending counseling sessions. He has completed his community service, but his probation extends until he turns 18. While he received some leniency due to his bipolar diagnosis, this didn't completely let him off the hook. He tried to use his mental health as an excuse for everything, but plenty of people live with the same condition without acting out in such harmful ways. Meanwhile, I have focused on mending my relationships with my two younger nephews, but the same cannot be said for my eldest nephew. The tension is palpable, as he seems to share the same feelings of resentment toward me. In fact, I have only seen him in person once in the past few months, and during that encounter, he glared at me with an intensity of hate that I have never experienced before. He stormed away, clearly upset. Now that he can no longer label me as the villain without facing scrutiny, he finds himself stuck in a challenging position. Since the start of the school year, he has pretty much shut down. I've been informed that he barely speaks at school, and my other nephews have mentioned that he faces laughter and isolation from his peers. This social exclusion is likely not helping his well-being. Simultaneously, my sister and her partner, Bill, are also not on the best terms with me. However, they cannot place blame on me for what has transpired. They understand that the core issues stem from their own ineffective parenting, which I have openly pointed out. I have encouraged them to be more present in their children's lives, something they should have been doing from the beginning. Now, our conversations have become strained and forced, filled with awkwardness. We avoid visiting each other's homes, only meeting at my parents' house where our mother insists we act civilly, a request I have no problem adhering to. My two younger nephews have since regained many of their privileges, including access to their TV and video games. However, my eldest nephew is not allowed to participate in those activities at all. I've been told he has some form of electronic entertainment in his room, but I'm not sure what it is. Regardless, he mostly keeps to himself in that space unless he has other obligations. The family has mostly turned against my eldest nephew due to his past behavior. I recently learned from my parents that they do not want him around during Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve this year, expressing their frustration with his behavior and petty theft. While I can somewhat understand their viewpoint, I also feel it is a bit harsh. My sister and Bill share similar feelings, as they have threatened to boycott the holidays if he is not allowed to attend. Although I have strong feelings against my eldest nephew, I can empathize with their desire for family unity during the holidays. In this emotional landscape, the family dynamics remain complicated and fraught with tension. I understand the reasoning behind their decision to exclude him from family activities, but I firmly believe that isolating him from everyone isn't the solution to improving his situation. My eldest nephew has a long way to go before he can repair the relationships he has damaged, if they can even be repaired under the current circumstances. It is quite possible that once he reaches adulthood, he might consider fleeing again, unless the experience from last time left a lasting impression that discourages him from doing so. It is my hope that, with time, he will find a path to improvement before it's too late to correct his troubling behavior. Despite the difficulties we've faced, I still care about him. He may not be my favorite person, but he is still my nephew. Unfortunately, I feel somewhat helpless in this situation. For now, the best I can do is to stay out of their conflicts and provide support in whatever way I can. As for recent updates, I had hoped to share more positive news after the holidays. However, things didn't really improve as I had wished. Initially, there seemed to be some progress, but then things took a turn for the worse. Although it took quite a bit of time, everything is relatively okay now. I had intended to share my thoughts sooner, but I thought it wise to wait for a more optimistic report. The majority of this reflection was actually composed months ago, but I procrastinated and ended up forgetting to post until recently. So here I am, presenting what I hope is the final update about the challenges surrounding my nephew, who has been described as a devil's snake due to his troubling antics. To recap, last year my sister and her partner, Bill, chose to spend Thanksgiving with Bill's family instead of our own. My eldest nephew did not exhibit the best behavior during that gathering either, but at least he wasn't causing trouble, according to their accounts. My sister and Bill took the time to talk with our parents about how excluding my nephew from family events would not be beneficial for his mental health. I supported their view because, from what I observed, my nephew would only feel resentment and isolation, which wouldn't help improve his state of mind. Eventually, my parents agreed to let him join us for Christmas Eve. I wanted to do something kind to help him feel better, so I went out in early December and bought him a used metallic green mountain bike from a local secondhand store. It needed some repairs, but I was able to buy it for just $30, which I thought was a great deal. I also learned that since his decent backpack had been stolen, he was using an old one that belonged to one of his brothers. I picked up a used backpack at the same secondhand store for about $5. After fixing up the bike and cleaning the backpack, I presented both gifts to him one Sunday. His reaction was one of pure shock. He seemed almost bewildered that I would give him anything at all. There was a trace of awkwardness in the air, yet he accepted the gifts with a grateful expression and began using them immediately for his daily commute to school, just as he had done with his old bike and backpack. My sister and Bill were equally surprised by my generosity, especially since I had replaced the items that were taken from him when he ran away after causing damage to my property. The gifts had the intended effect, as I was no longer the target of his anger. For a while, he had been looking for any excuse to blame me for his troubles, labeling me as the villain in his life. The family Christmas Eve party marked an important turning point. During the event, my sister and Bill made him apologize to me for projecting his anger onto me. They stood close by, watching over him as he spoke to me, reminding him to make eye contact. In his apology, he admitted that I was not to blame for his arrest. He acknowledged that his actions, egging me on, stealing from me, and damaging my belongings, were entirely his fault and promised that he would not repeat those actions. We shook hands, and thankfully, his behavior at the party was commendable. He did not cause any issues. However, his parents kept a watchful eye on him throughout the evening, almost as if they had him on a leash, which created a somewhat uncomfortable atmosphere. Yet, I completely understood their vigilance. They had invested a lot to ensure he could attend Christmas with the family. Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worse again during New Year's. My eldest nephew stole a bottle of champagne from his parents and quickly consumed the entire bottle while locked in a room. He drank it all quickly while locked in the bathroom, making sure no one could stop him. Earlier, he had asked for a drink, but the adults said he was too young. Frustrated and determined, he decided to take matters into his own hands and stole a bottle. He gulped it down in one go, oblivious to the consequences. Until that moment, we had no idea that he had been taking alcohol for quite some time. It turned out he had a secret stash hidden away, slowly dwindling as he took sips here and there. Some of the alcohol even made its way into the hands of other kids in the neighborhood, as he sold it to them when he felt the urge to make some quick cash. When his parents found out about his little adventure, the punishment was relatively light. He was just sent to his room for the night. He confessed he took the alcohol because he was really craving it, especially since it was New Year's. His brothers, perhaps feeling guilty or wanting to set things straight, told their parents about the hidden stash. They led their parents to a plastic tub tucked away in the crawl space beneath the house. When asked how they ended up with so much alcohol, my two younger nephews sheepishly admitted they had been following their older brother's example. They would sneak out and take one beer at a time or pour some hard liquor from its original bottle into another container. But the biggest shock was yet to come. They had been breaking into other people's houses throughout the neighborhood. Their method was to check for unlocked doors and windows, intentionally avoiding homes with dogs that would bark and alert the owners. The youngest brother, being the smallest, would crawl through windows, allowing his brothers to follow him inside. They were careful not to take anything of significant value, intending to return multiple times. After they got arrested the previous year, they seemed to lose interest in their petty thievery. They admitted they were merely imitating their older brother. Unfortunately, their troubles didn't end there. They faced consequences for not coming clean about their escapades, and word of their deeds spread through the neighborhood. Some neighbors had suspected them, especially considering how adept my nephews had become at sneaking around. You would think they would have been more cautious, especially about security cameras, but maybe they figured old Uncle Yem wouldn't have any. However, once their secrets were out, several neighbors promptly installed cameras to keep an eye on things. The punishment for admitting their actions was not severe, but it was somewhat redundant for the oldest nephew, who was already facing issues due to being on probation. He hadn't attempted to steal anything again until he took a bottle of champagne. To help him manage his cravings, Uncle Bill started giving him a lot of mint gum to chew, as it was what he used himself to cut back on drinking. He even locked all his alcohol in a fridge secured with a padlock in the garage. Bill suspected his son tried to get into it on at least one occasion. Things seemed to be settling down until February when my oldest nephew got into a fight at school. He claimed he didn't start it, but a kid had been picking on him for some time, which led to a physical confrontation. In the scuffle, he lost both of his front teeth when his face collided with a locker, courtesy of the bully. It quickly became clear that there was a reason behind this altercation. My younger nephews revealed that their older brother had a reputation at school for bullying others, particularly targeting kids who were smaller or weaker. He would steal things from them, push them around when no one was watching, and had even been known to use a small knife to puncture bike tires. Ultimately, the tables turned when the big brother of one of the kids he had bullied sought revenge. The outcome was severe. Both of my nephew's front teeth were knocked out, and his nose was broken in the process. An emergency visit to the hospital was necessary for an oral surgeon to reattach his teeth, and he ended up with special braces to keep them in place. His nose required resetting as well, and he was put in a neck brace. The poor boy felt so embarrassed and ashamed that he didn't want to be seen by anyone for months. Despite the seriousness of the incident, no charges were pressed against the other boy, which left me puzzled. I've asked many times why no one pursued legal action. The answer remains unclear, as the other kid's parents decided to let it go. The other kid's parents contributed significantly to the expenses associated with my nephew's dental and nasal treatments, using their insurance policies to cover at least half of the costs. This is what they relayed to me, at least. Unfortunately, my sister and her partner Bill faced a challenging situation, as their health insurance did not offer adequate coverage for the remaining expenses. They had to deal with a high copay, which made things even more difficult. Instead of filing claims, they opted not to pursue anything further, primarily because they wanted to avoid the stress of going back to court. The other parents, on their part, only contributed what they did because they were fearful of being sued. They were eager to avoid any legal complications. I felt compelled to help a bit myself. After my own legal matters were settled, I had $500 in cash that I had received as part of that process. I decided to give that money back to my sister and Bill to lighten their financial burden a little. They did not disclose how much the treatment for my nephew's nose and front teeth actually cost, but I suspect that it might have wiped out whatever savings they had left. When I saw my nephew after the incident, his face was bruised and swollen, and his 2 front teeth were wired in place. Understandably, he was devastated and refused to return to school, opting instead to complete his remaining lessons online with a laptop provided by his school. Reports indicate that the boy who had physically attacked him faced nothing more than a 2-week suspension from school, which only added to my frustration. While I won't deny that I was upset by the situation, I also knew that my nephew had not been entirely innocent in the matter, as he had often been a bully to other kids. This experience has highlighted the reality that what goes around comes around, and sometimes consequences emerge unexpectedly. Now that summer is here, my eldest nephew has become more of a recluse, spending most of his time indoors. He occasionally rides his bike alone for an hour or 2, but mostly, he prefers to stay in his room. My sister and Bill have considered moving closer to his parents after their son's probation ends. Given the animosity directed toward them from the neighborhood, it's an understandable choice, although they may need to wait at least another year to make that move happen. I have also been spending more time with my 2 younger nephews, and I am happy to report that they seem to be doing much better. They have shown more respect and have been welcomed back into my home without any issues. Nothing has gone missing, and I genuinely enjoy our time together watching movies and playing games. They're turning back into the good kids they used to be, making efforts to learn from their past mistakes. On the rare occasions when I do see my eldest nephew, he is no longer distant or cold toward me. In fact, he once brought his bike over for repairs, which was a positive sign. However, he remains a boy of few words, often appearing stoically silent. He has expressed a desire to move far away from this place once he turns 18, and while we have suggested trade school as an option, he seems open to the idea. I am trying my best to be a supportive uncle without overstepping my boundaries. At this point, after everything that has transpired, I find that I may not have much more to add.